I'd like to recognize the good member from the 2nd Legislative District, Representative Wilcox.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to start my remarks with recognizing one of the finest opening prayers I have ever heard, the good representative from the 11th District. Very fine, sir, and very inclusive. Very much appreciate that. I'd also like to recognize some people. I appreciate the Speaker in recognizing all of those in healthcare who have been at a high level of readiness and a tremendous level of stress for longer than anyone thought would be possible. And there are many others as well. A big part of all of us, many of us, have been able to isolate ourselves and keep ourselves safe, but that's only because so many people have been reporting to work every day in order to allow others to be safe. And I'll just mention a few of these, especially this week. My heart goes out to all the truck drivers out there that have been stranded on one side of the mountains or the other. Without them, we would not be able to conduct our daily lives, and we would not be able to behave in the safest possible way. There are many others, farm workers in Eastern Washington, as well as Western Washington, people that keep our grocery stores open, people that are involved in all kinds of distribution efforts, from distribution centers to load out people to the folks that drive the smaller delivery trucks. We've kept this economy going, and we've kept our society going over some of the most difficult 2 years that anyone can remember, because so many people have stayed on the job, done what was necessary, and that allowed others to live a much safer life. I appreciate all of you as well. Madam Speaker, I've been in a minority caucus for a long time now, about as long as you've been in a majority caucus. And, you know, it is easy for a minority caucus to sit back and throw stones and rant. And I think all of us give way to that temptation sometimes. But I'm in the middle of a caucus right now that is doing things on a bigger scale than I've ever seen. This is not going to be a year when you see House Republicans carp about everything, oppose everything. What you're seeing this year is House Republicans that are bringing big ideas to the table. And these are big ideas that I think already have a degree of agreement from the majority caucus here. These are addressing issues that we know need to be addressed. Some of them are very creative and are ideas that Republicans have not embraced in the past. It's true, we have big challenges right now, and this is not a time for any of us to sit back and just say no. First, we're in agreement that there were major issues last year that were addressed in legislation, and that legislation needs to be perfected. There's a little bit of regret, and I'm going to express that a little bit later, in the area of public safety, where there was a lot of discussion. There were a lot of amendments offered, and as those laws came into effect, it became absolutely plain that they had gone too far and that there were improvements that were required. It's a matter of regret for me that we offered those solutions, and under the circumstances of last year, we didn't get sufficient attention, I think, and neither did those that came in and testified about these. That's a flaw in our process. But we are agreed going forward that these are changes that need to be made, and that's, I think, a positive thing for all of us. A few years ago, we passed a bill that you referenced recently. It had to do with long-term health care. And I've said many times that anybody that's been involved in government or business or nonprofits at a high level has seen problems that are seemingly overwhelming, had a great idea, And then you find that the numbers don't quite work. The only mistake that you make is if you don't adjust to that. And Madam Speaker, you've heard me over the last week talk about the long-term healthcare bill. So this is not going to be a surprise to you. We oppose it. We think that we should repeal that. But this will be a surprise to many people. The good representative from the 31st District recently dropped a bill that is not going backwards. It's going forwards towards a positive solution for this major problem. And I would urge that all of us think hard about a totally different approach and acknowledge that this is an important problem and applaud those who tried to address it a few years ago, whether that was the perfect approach or not. Let's look at a different approach that includes the private sector and can be more successful. Madam Speaker, we also agree that the environment is critically important. In fact, members of the House Republicans are often the folks that live out on the landscape, and our friends are the ones that work in the natural resource arena and depend on a functioning ecosystem and treasure beyond almost anything except for their families, the connection that we have with nature. And that's why, although you've seen us oppose a lot of environmental efforts in the past, the good lady who represents the 9th Legislative District has brought forward one of the largest packages of environmental reforms that we have seen in the 11, 12 years now, if you count this year, that both you and I have been in the House of Representatives. This representative represents from here a far corner of the state of Washington, but she is looking at ways that can absolutely address the problem completely of municipalities that don't have wastewater capacity and as a consequence pollute Puget Sound. At the same time, since her approach provides all the dollars that are necessary to add that capacity, it probably ends up being the greatest economic development effort for the Puget Sound that we have seen in our time. Again, this is a representative from a far corner of Eastern Washington, but she cares about the whole state too. She's not looking to just fix her corner of it. She wants to come to where one of the biggest problems. And Madam Speaker, she is not trying to address goals that we cannot solve ourselves. She is trying to address problems that we have contained in our state that we can absolutely fix, and at the same time provide the greatest possible access for all of your constituents to the wonderful environmental treasures that we have in our state that are not always as accessible to them. Madam Speaker, we've talked about housing more than almost any other issue over the last few years. In fact, I've told people over and over that the housing debates have set the tone for the last 2 sessions, and the tone has been very contentious, full of ideology, and maybe on both sides. And Madam Speaker, I'm glad that we're going forward with this. Homelessness and the cost of housing, the availability of housing isn't just an urban problem. We're seeing this in almost all the small cities and small towns and rural areas around Washington. The challenge has been that over my 12 years here, I would say that the majority of bills that have an impact on housing has made it harder to build homes, more expensive to build homes. They've demonized places that would welcome more population. And it's critical, Madam Speaker, that we understand that we've got this immense problem. You said about 250,000 homes, and I believe you. And sadly, $1 billion doesn't go very far in public housing. I think $1 billion, based on the costs we've seen the last few years, yields about 2,500 homes. That's take 100 years to create the new homes that are necessary if we're going to fill that 250,000 home gap. So, Madam Speaker, it's absolutely necessary, if we care about this, that we start listening to the private sector and those people like my good seatmate from the 2nd District who have spent their lives in providing affordable housing for people. And I think we have to be aware that the solution can't just come in some parts of the state. Madam Speaker, I've got another concern that we're not going to stop talking about. I've often talked about process in my opening talks in the past. And I want to thank you for something. I think you've listened and you've been very open to House Republicans speaking on a variety of issues. And this has been a place where it may not always be pleasant to listen, but people can say their piece, and that's important. But what's even more important is that diverse opinions are listened to. And when I think about the bills that we're going to have to fix this year, some of them having tragic human consequences, there were plenty of people that were able to see these problems. But under the circumstances where human contact is lost, where we have an immense quantity of comment from the public and from members, the quality of the contact is lost. And Madam Speaker, it's the job of the majority to govern. There's no question about that. You have more votes. It's important for our system that those who have more votes end up winning. But it's a disaster for you, your caucus, and the state if, as you're winning, you're not allowing the minority and the citizens of Washington to help you avoid making mistakes. There's been too many mistakes made over the last year. I think our process is breaking down. I think we have valued quantity over quality. And there's one other issue, Madam Speaker. I've heard too many people say that they're afraid to come and testify. They're afraid because they're on an unpopular side. They're afraid that there's going to be retaliation. In some cases, their employers won't allow them to. This should be a place where we encourage people to come in, especially if they're unpopular. And you and we will continue to make mistakes unless we understand that our best friends are those that are willing to tell us the things that we don't want to hear, and we incorporate that in our process. One last thing, Madam Speaker. We've talked a lot about emergency powers. I believe strongly that all three of the branches of government are absolutely critical. We've heard from many of the House Democratic members that they believe the same thing. They have openly and in the press said that they believe that we need emergency powers reform. Madam Speaker, recently the good gentleman from the 14th District dropped HB 1772. I've told people if I were the speaker and if the governor was a Republican, I know that that sounds unrealistic to all of you, but if that were the case, this is the bill that I would want. This allows the governor to operate as he should, and it also requires the legislature to operate as all of us should. It's critical that we pay attention to this. And Madam Speaker, I just want to let you know that these bills that I've mentioned, especially the long-term health care replacement bill and the emergency powers bill, need to get hearings. If they don't, it's important for House Republicans to move in committee that they be voted on. We haven't done that a lot in the past, but these are critical things. And I think it's important that we all exercise our responsibility to vote on these things. Madam Speaker, like you, I have high hopes for this session. I think that we can do a better job than we have in the past. I think that we have diversity of thought that's very positive in both of our caucuses. And even though I'm speaking to you, I'd like to challenge members of both caucuses. Don't fall into groupthink. Don't feel like loyalty to our group or even our caucus is more important than loyalty to our hearts and loyalty to our constituents. We should have more contentious votes, Madam Speaker. These things shouldn't just be decided inside the caucus room. Everyone depends on us to think for ourselves and think for our constituents. We've got to be sure that ideology isn't the prime motivator for all of us. Thank you, Madam Speaker.